Today's bombshell cabinet news came as we were preparing to mark a stark parliamentary milestone. The House of Commons has been stuck in procedural gridlock for nearly 2 months. Here's why, and stick with me. In June, the House voted to compel the government to turn over documents related to a federal green tech fund that is now shuttered, but that the Auditor General found was mired in conflicts of interest. The order would have compelled the feds to hand those documents to the RCMP as well, and the Liberals argue that would breach charter rights, so they're refusing to hand them over. In September, the Speaker ruled the government had to comply. The Tories then introduced a motion to refer the issue to a committee, and they're doing what's called a filibuster ever since, basically keeping the debate going, which, because it's a matter of what's called privilege, overtakes all other business of the House. And this is where the rubber really hits the road for everyone watching at home, because that means for the last 2 months, there's nothing else going on. No legislation introduced, debated, or passed. So is there an end in sight? Mark Gerritsen is Deputy Government House Leader. Andrew Scheer is the Conservatives House Leader. And Peter Julian is the NDP's House Leader. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your patience. And I appreciate you making the time for the conversation tonight. Before we get to this conversation, I do have to ask you about the significant news today. Minister Boissonnault stepping aside from cabinet. Mr. Gerritsen, from your government's perspective, why was the Prime Minister standing by his side yesterday morning and 24 hours later, he's not in cabinet?
Well, I think it's important to reflect on what has happened. Mr. Boissonnault has spent a number of days now defending himself. I think that he recognizes it's becoming a distraction, and based on the information that you've already reported on, had a conversation with the Prime Minister, and they came to the conclusion that the best way for him to move forward was to step away from cabinet to remove himself as a distraction while he focuses on defending himself, which is exactly what he said in his statement.
So there's no admission of wrongdoing here. This is just because in no part of the statement today did they say this is a distraction, we're stepping aside because of a distraction, just that he's going to focus on clearing his name. So there's no admittance here of wrongdoing from your perspective?
No, Mr. Boissonnault has been very clear about this, in the statements that he's made in defending himself over the last week, and he's now, said that he is going to take the time to reflect on that and make sure that he clears his name.
Respectfully, based on what you've heard, do you actually feel he has been clear? I think the problem, and certainly I interviewed the president, for example, of the BC Métis Federation today. The problem is they feel like it's been much less than clear, and that in fact there have been, something that he apologized for last week, shifting ways in which he identifies as Indigenous at different parts of his history over the last decade. Like that is not sitting well with, for example, people like that. Does it sit? Is that okay with you?
I think the sheer fact that we're even having this conversation demonstrates that this is a distraction, and it's creating, taking away from the important discussions that we need to be having about supporting Canadians right now. And Mr. Boissonnault has recognized that. He's recognized that, and he's made a point of saying, "I'm going to step away after having a conversation with the Prime Minister, and I'm going to focus on defending myself." So I think it's important that we let Mr. Boissonnault speak for himself and demonstrate that for himself.
To be fair, I've requested him multiple times. He won't do that. I don't understand what the mechanism is that is going to clear his name all of a sudden. And again, I ask with great respect. I don't think it's a distraction that Indigenous people are, telling us that they feel like the very promise of reconciliation that your government put forward is, destroyed is the word that the president of the BC Métis Federation told me today in an interview because of this. Like, that's not just a distraction.
No, what I'm saying is that it's taking, when I say it's a distraction, it's taking away from us being able to focus on what's really important for Canadians right now, because it's consuming a lot of the time in the House. So
reconciliation is important too.
Absolutely. And making sure that we focus and work on that is extremely important. But Mr. Boissonnault has come to the conclusion after having a conversation with the Prime Minister, I need to step away from cabinet in order to focus on clearing my name and defending myself. So I think it's important that we let him do that work. We let him demonstrate that, and then we can draw conclusions at that time.
Okay, I want to get in your colleagues, and then we will. I've left a lot of time for the other discussion that I know we want to have tonight. Mr. Scheer, is there a world? Your party was the first to call for Mr. Boissonnault to step aside. Is there a world in which what he has said to defend himself, which is that he had confusion over his heritage, and that he, which other people have come forward and said I have had to, and that his business partner was the one who, made sure that the company was identified as Indigenous, so that he did not have any knowledge. Is there a world in which, Mr. Boissonnault did not do any of this maliciously?
Well, look, all you have to do is look at what Randy Boissonnault has been caught out in falsehoods already. He said there was another Randy working at the company. Turns out there wasn't. He was the only Randy. He said that he wasn't communicating with the company while he was in cabinet. Now we know there were text messages back and forth between the other people at the company and himself. Now we find out that the company was falsely stating that he had Indigenous heritage, that he himself has self-identified and declared that he had this heritage when in fact he doesn't. And I don't think we should characterize this as a distraction. This is a cabinet minister. These are the actions of a government minister, someone who sits around the cabinet table as we talk about important issues like reconciliation and procurement rules that are meant to help legitimate Indigenous-owned companies access the procurement system. And so these are very serious allegations. And I would also point out that Justin Trudeau has not held Randy Boissonnault to account for any of this. All they've said today is that he's going to step away. So this is like a timeout. You know, Jody Wilson-Raybould was fired for telling the truth. A strong Indigenous woman was fired for telling the truth under Justin Trudeau, yet he protects a weak, fake Indigenous man for telling falsehoods. And that's what Canadians should understand about this.
I'm going to put the same question, though, to you again, once again, just because I think, look, the ethics commissioner looked into a lot of the allegations that you made initially around the Randys. I agree, like, eyebrow raising. At the same time, concluded that there was no breach of conflict of interest rules in the case of Minister Boissonnault at that point when the commissioner had investigated that stuff. Since that's the conclusion the ethics commissioner arrived at in that instance, is it also not possible that what Mr. Boissonnault was saying to defend himself is also true?
Well, I would say if you look at the past untruths that he's been caught in, it's probably a good indicator of what's to come in the future. I will also point out there's new information coming to light. The RCMP now saying that they're investigating the Edmonton Police. Thank you. The fact that his company is facing 9 fraud-related charges. So there's a lot more to this. And rather than deal with this right away by coming clean on all of this, Mr. Boissonnault continually tried to evade scrutiny, was caught out in falsehoods. And again, Justin Trudeau is still not acknowledging that he's done anything wrong. All they've said is that he's taking a timeout, taking a step away. Who knows? Does that mean he's going to be brought back into cabinet after Christmas? They didn't even say why he's doing it, other than just an oblique reference to clearing his name. So there's still a lot more that we need to get answers
Mr. Julian, though, what if, in fact, the Prime Minister is saying that because there is a possibility that Mr. Boissonnault does clear his name? That are you open to that possibility? Like I said to Mr. Scheer, that the defense he has provided is one that is factual, is true, that possibly he didn't do anything wrong.
Well, there's a whole bunch of contradictions in his stories. I think Blake Desjardins yesterday on your show was very eloquent in calling for his resignation. There is no doubt that needed to happen. And it does undermine, destroy reconciliation in the same way that the fact that there are dozens of Indigenous communities that don't have safe drinking water, like Laurie Idlut raised today in the House of Commons, has destroyed reconciliation. The fact that it's been more than 2 years since a single call to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been implemented by this government, that destroys reconciliation. This is a contradiction that I think Mr. Trudeau wears, that as this controversy developed, he did not take action, and Mr. Boissonnault should have resigned days ago.
With great respect, do you have any proof that Minister Boissonnault set out to maliciously represent himself in order to do what? Is it your view to curry favor with the company he co-owned, because he denies even knowing that they were being identified as Indigenous owned?
Well, the truth will come out. But my point is this, that reconciliation is being destroyed by both the inaction of the current government, but also the fact that in a case like this, Mr. Trudeau waited days before there was any action at all.
Okay, let's turn to what I talked about in that introduction, and that is what's happening in Parliament right now. And my first question on that, Mr. Gerritsen, is I spoke to the commissioner of the RCMP. Your party's concern has been we're not handing it over because of the precedent it would set, the breach of charter rights, and sending something to the RCMP. He very plainly told me that there's lots of stuff that he's already in receipt of that he isn't sure if he'll be able to use, for example, in court. So he's put it on a USB key. He's put the key, over here. He's kind of isolated it, and he's looking at everything he can do with all the other information. Why is that not enough? Why can't you just take that and decide to hand everything over as Parliament has ordered you to?
But the problem with the question is that you're assuming that all the tactics that have been deployed to this point are justified. For starters, what we have here, and you did a very good job of describing it at the beginning, is we have a motion that the Conservatives have brought forward, which directs this issue to be sent to committee. Now, it's very rare that a party, I don't think I've ever seen it, will actually filibuster their own motion. 188 people have spoken to this by last count in the last 28 sitting days of Parliament. 168 of them were Conservatives. The other 4 parties represent the remaining 20 people. Conservatives are filibustering their own motion. So you have to ask yourself, before you can even get to your question, is why would they do that? Why would they introduce a motion to send something to a committee and then not let us vote on sending it to committee? And that's really where we're at. And they're doing it because they're trying to give you the perception that Parliament just can't function right now. And the only solution right now is to go to an election. That's what they're trying to do.
You're sort of assuming something, too, in that is actually what you think to be the main question.
I'm assuming
but you're ignoring the substance of my question is, why aren't you handing over the documents?
Right,
because the House has made that order.
I'm happy to get to that point too, but I just want to be clear that yes, I am assuming their motive, but I have not assumed anything on the premise of my argument. That is all factual as to what's going on in the House. As it relates to the documents themselves, the RCMP said in a letter to Parliament, this is a very a way that we've never received information before. And by the way, if we need to get this, we can go to a judge and get a warrant to get the necessary documents. So
then why do you care?
Because what the Conservatives are doing, why do we care? Because they've said we might not, and you even just said it, they said we might not be able to use that evidence in the manner in which it's being gathered.
That's for them to decide. Why is it for you to decide if the House has expressed its will otherwise?
There has never been a time in Canadian history where a legal proceeding has moved forward in a court based on evidence that's been obtained through a motion of Parliament. That's the reality. The law enforcement agencies, the attorneys across the country don't need Parliament to be directing them, evidence towards them. They know how to obtain that on their own.
I just don't get why it's for you to decide that.
It's not for us to decide. It's the way that our court system is set up. It's the way that our legal system and the justice system is set up.
Then let the information get to the SCB. Let the RCMP make that decision. Let the courts make that decision. Why are you, as the government, entitled to go against the will of the House?
What the government is saying is that they have concerns over handing over this information. They have, and even the Speaker said in his ruling, it is justified the motion that the Conservatives put forward, and the best place for this to go to is committee. So if the Conservatives were to actually let us vote on this and let it go to committee, actually a lot of the answers that a lot of the questions you're asking right now will be answered in committee when we invite the witnesses to come forward to give expert testimony on it. If you just let me finish. But the point is that Conservatives know this. They don't want to let it get to committee because they know that if it gets to committee, then the experts will start to come forward and give you the reasons why this is a horrible way for evidence to be gathered in a proceeding like this.
Why not send this right to committee? I don't get it. Like if the committee is going to provide evidence that supports what you want to happen, then what are you afraid of?
Oh, it's very simple. The House of Commons passed a lawful order for the government to hand over documents to the RCMP. The power for the government to do that is to act on behalf of the taxpayer, the people who pay the money that was abused. And let's remember that for a second. If you'll allow me to just frame this, this was a $400 million scandal. $1 billion slush fund was set up. Liberal appointees started funneling money into their own companies. The Auditor General found $400 million misappropriated and over 180 conflicts of interest. So taxpayers' money that was meant to go and fund innovation to help clean up Canada's environmental record was going to Liberal insiders funneling it into their own companies. So that's the unprecedented nature that we're dealing with. It's because the Liberal scandals have reached new depths that Parliament finds itself in these new areas. And what the House of Commons passed was an order to hand over all the documents to the RCMP. And the Liberals have been fighting accountability and transparency on this every step of the way. It took a whistleblower coming to committee to say it's not just about what's in what the Auditor General found. We have to look at what the motivations were, and that can only be obtained through these government documents. So that's what the RCMP needs to have.
But if the RCMP, like taking a step back for a second, if the RCMP says, I can't use that information. And I spoke to the commissioner. He said, I'm putting it on CUSB. I'm worried that I won't be able to use it in court, that it will not stand up in a court of law. Can you see how the perception is your party is pursuing this sheerly because of politics and nothing else?
Not at all. And something Mr. Garrett said was just outright false. We're not directing the RCMP at all. We just want to make sure that they have access to documents. The RCMP commissioner did not say that he wasn't going to use them. He just said that they haven't figured out how to do that
No, he
best
had
at this
concerns.
point.
He expressed concerns
but
to me.
he actually said, I have the quote, he said, we're not saying a hard no. So what we're saying is, let's let the RCMP do their job. Let's make sure they have access to the documents.
Can that be decided by a committee? One second, Mr. Gerritsen, let me finish here, Mr. Gerritsen. Can that be decided by a committee? Why not? Then why'd you put forward a motion saying it's good?
Exactly.
No, that can only be done by the government. A committee, we've already ordered the government to hand over the documents. The committee has already done that. The House has already done that. The Liberals have refused. And let's go back to the main point here. If you were a small business owner, if you're a mechanic, and you found out that one of your employees was stealing from you, you could hand over all the documents to the RCMP. The government should have done that proactively. They're quibbling over the fact that there's an order forcing them to do it. They should have done that as soon as they found out about it. And the fact that they didn't tells you everything you know about the motives of Mr. Gerritsen's
I would just quickly say that RCMP has not identified anyone as being uncooperative at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
They are not handing over the documents
to
Parliament.
Parliament, but the RCMP is also investigating and hasn't said that
they're saying what the RCMP has said is that they're going through the publicly available data. What we're saying, what we heard from the expert witness, the whistleblower who warned everybody about what was going on after they tried to cover it up, he said that we have to look at the internal email communications, the types of documents that get passed between government departments, because that's where you'll find the motivations and the motives. And that's, he said, that's where the criminality is.
5 seconds and I got to have
Mr. Scheer
Julian
wants people to believe him, he needs to explain why he would put forward a motion that he would then never let pass.
Give you a second and then Mr. Julian.
The Speaker put a very, very tight constraint on the type of motion that our original motion was to do exactly this, to hold the government into contempt for their refusal to produce it. So it's the Liberals that are choosing to keep Parliament paralyzed.
So let's say, okay, at the end of the day, people are watching are going, why am I going to care about this, Mr. Julian? And it's because of that, right? There is no legislation being introduced, debated, passed. I don't understand what your party's position is. To be very clear, you have said the Conservatives are obstructionists. Why are they doing this? They're terrible for doing this. At the same time, you said, but the government needs to hand over the documents. You could aid the government in forcing closure on this and doing exactly what you're laying out for Canadians is the problem, that there's nothing happening in Parliament, but you refuse to do so. Why?
Well, first off, we're the adults in the room. We have the Liberals and Conservatives twisting themselves in pretzels with the Conservatives filibustering their own motion, and the Liberals not really giving justification to why, when Parliament passes a motion that the NDP voted for, why they're not sharing the documents. It is very clear. Liberals should share the documents. Conservatives should stop filibustering their own motion. And the reality is it's a scandal that deserves to be examined in the same way. And under the Harper regime, we saw how the Conservatives shut down any inquiry into the ETS scandal. It was $400 million. The G8 scandal, it was $1 billion. We've seen this practice and this behavior repeatedly from Conservative and Liberal governments.
But
the reality
you have
is,
the power to do something.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
In terms of paralysis, we're talking about over $20 million now that Canadians have paid for, while the Liberals and Conservatives turn themselves into pretzels.
If you feel the Conservatives are so obstructionist, why don't you join forces with the Liberals and force closure and force it to end? Like, I don't understand. You're trying to have it both ways.
We want the transparency, but the NDP, as you know, over the last 5 sitting days, we've succeeded in getting a number of pieces of legislation through by unanimous consent. Taylor Backrack on the Haida Gwaii Council, we got it through. We got through the issue of protection for centers of worship. We have got through the Ukrainian
you might not
motion
have
as well.
a full economic statement, Mr. Julian, with all due respect, and you could do something that changes that.
And with all due respect, we're going to continue to be the adults in the room. Jagmeet Singh is calling for GST off home heating and other essentials. The NDP is the one that is actually talking about affordability for folks.
Okay,
I just point out that the NDP are participating in the debate tonight, so they are actually speaking to that, and the Liberals have as well.
We'll be tuning in. I gotta cut it off. I appreciate you all making the time for the discussion very much. I hope we can get together again to do it, because I don't think it's going to be resolved anytime soon. Mr. Gerritsen, Mr. Scheer, and Mr. Julian, thank you very much.